A reading from Genesis. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones off the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. The Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid, and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
In our story today, Jacob meets God in a most unordinary place. It isn't in a temple. There's not an altar or a priest there to mediate the encounter for him. There's only Jacob, alone in the wilderness, running for his life, afflicted with the guilt of wronging his father and his brother, and carrying the grief of losing his family and the only home that he's ever known. You see, a few verses before our text today begins, Esau, whose life as a hunter has taught him to kill with efficiency, well, Esau made a vow to kill, we'll call it murder, his brother Jacob just as soon as their father passed away. And as other biblical brothers have taught us, we have every reason to believe that he would carry through with this threat. Luckily, their mother Rebekah found out about Esau's intentions and sent Jacob away before he could be harmed. You see, Jacob isn't out in the wilderness on an adventure quest. He's a refugee, forced from his home by the threat of violence. In our world today, the number of people forcibly displaced from their homes is the highest that it's been since World War II. And according to a new report by the United Nations Refugee Agency, there are over 65 million people currently living as refugees or as displaced persons in our world. This includes more than 10 million people who are displaced just last year alone. And more than half of the world's refugee population are children, many of them fleeing alone. So when God shows up to encourage and covenant with Jacob, it's a reminder to us all that God has always had a soft spot for the refugee and the exile. From the Hebrew people fleeing the Egyptian army, to the Israelites exiled in Babylon, to the nearly 12 million displaced Syrians, God is on the side of the vulnerable and all those seeking refuge and asylum from violence. And this passage encourages us to have compassion on the refugee by supporting organizations like Preemptive Love Coalition. And as one of Wilshire's many missions partners, we support their work in conflict zones, places like Iraq and Syria, and with extraordinary people like Medea. One-armed, homeless, widowed and jobless with mouths to feed, Medea's been through hell. But that's not the story that she wants you to hear, because that's not where her story ends. She remembers the day in 2003, a Thursday, when soldiers entered the farm her family worked in Iraq. Fighting broke out, and the locals were urged to leave immediately. But it was too late. And Medea's family came into the line of fire. Her mother died, her niece and her brother were hit many times, and Medea's arm had to be amputated. A little later, her brother died from his wounds, leaving Medea and her sister with 10 orphans to care for. But they pressed on. Farming their land, trying to make ends meet, they fought. But then ISIS came, and it was horror all over again. The confrontation between Iraqi government forces and the militant group left houses all over Medea's town in ruins, with the government planes dropping bombs haphazardly all over the place. Medea took the entire family to a slum in Baghdad where other displaced families were trying to survive. There she met volunteers from Preemptive Love Coalition. And soon Medea decided to get out and start working again. And with a little help, she did just that. For the tens of thousands victimized by ISIS, Preemptive Love Coalition writes, they don't need a hand out. They need a hand up. And one of the ways that they do that, one of the ways that they seek to change the way the world engages polarizing conflict, is by empowering victims and turning them into small business owners, employers, and sustainable sources of revenue for their family and their community. So Medea borrowed $70 and began selling vegetables purchased in the wholesale market. She received a lot of encouragement for being willing to work and lots of support from the other people in the market, because despite her missing arm, despite her disability, she strove to press on, and she had ambition. So today, Medea's business is growing. Her farming history and the fact that she did finish school gave her the background that she needed to succeed. And she has plans to take her business even further. And she is now partnering with the Preemptive Love Coalition and has received a $750 women's empowerment grant to help expand her store so she can increase her profits and put several more women to work, caring for their families as well and doing a service to their community. And at this point, we have every indication that she is going to succeed. How wonderful. See, many of us don't expect to find God in such a place, but there God is, moving in those forced to flee their homes. There God is, empowering the most vulnerable through the gifts people like you make each day. And it's the same work that God is doing in Jacob's life when Jacob finds himself displaced, homeless, and sleeping in a field with only a rock as a pillow. It's not the kind of place a domesticated God would be seen. And Jacob certainly isn't the kind of person that a respectable God would be seen with. But there God is anyway. God comes to Jacob in a dream and in an extraordinary moment of grace, covenants with Jacob. That's God's promise to be with Jacob whatever may come. And it's a continuation of Abram's covenant. of Isaac's covenant. It's a covenant to make something out of Jacob. But he's not there yet. Right now, he's still alone in a field fleeing for his life. And few of us know what it is to be like in physical exile. But many of us here at Wilshire do, however, understand what it is to be in a spiritual exile of sorts. In front of our building is a banner that says, "I never thought I would be Baptist again until I found Wilshire." Wilshire and churches like her have become a ladder that God uses to walk so many out of their spiritual sojourn. People like Connie. Connie was a young woman in her 30s with 2 young boys and an alcoholic husband. She took a job working at the First Baptist Church in her town as a nursery worker. She reasoned that taking a job working at the church would ensure that she would be able to get her kids there each Sunday. And she was right. So alone, week after week, she awoke each Sunday, dressed and fed her boys, and drove them to church by herself. Her kids grew up within the precincts of the temple because of her commitment for years. And then eventually, years and years later, her husband would dry out and give up the bottle. He would even begin to attend church as well, but it was really too little too late, and the marriage didn't make it. And because of the divorce, even after years of faithful service in the nursery and dutifully dragging 2 wild boys to church on her own each week, the pastor of the church asked her to stop serving there. She was crushed. And as many know, when a divorce occurs, who gets the church can be as big a question as who gets the house. And Connie's ex-husband got the church. So after that, on Sundays, Connie's children continued to go to First Baptist Church. It made sense. That's the church that she had spent years and years making sure they felt at home and comfortable in. But now they went with her ex-husband, while she tried other churches around town alone. But it was hard to trust those people. It was hard to go alone after everything that had happened to her. How could she not see Pharisees, hypocrites, and just the downright mean around every corner? Connie lives in Montana now, and she doesn't come to Wilshire. But she read about us in the news last year. And when she did, she said, "That name Wilshire sounds familiar." So she did a little research, and turns out she had read about Wilshire in the news a few years before that, when you all handled with such grace the Ebola crisis. And somehow she got my email and wrote me last year and told me how badly she wished there was a Wilshire where she lived. Because of what she's seen and read about you in the news over the years, she believes that this is the kind of place that would welcome even her. This is the kind of place where she could begin to trust church again. So much, in fact, that just your story gave her the courage to get out and start trying churches again. So she started going. And she's found the little church that she's beginning to like. She writes me and says, it isn't Wilshire, but she's starting to feel welcome. And the pastor of Connie's church is also a divorced woman. Something Connie would have never believed was even possible if Wilshire's story hadn't given her the courage to begin her journey out of spiritual exile. And how many stories like that do we have just in this room? How many have found refuge here at Wilshire? And if you're looking for refuge, whether you're with us this morning or just tuning in with us via live stream, Wilshire is a refuge church. You see, many of us come from less than favorable spiritual backgrounds. And in some cases, these backgrounds may have done us some real spiritual damage. We know what it is to be a spiritual refugee, fleeing the burden of bad religion, yet carrying with us the scars that it left inside us. Or perhaps many of us, well, our exile isn't really anyone's fault. Maybe something happened that wasn't supposed to happen. Or something that was supposed to happen didn't. Something maybe that makes it so hard for us to see God in our lives. In some way, I think we're all running from God a little bit. And when we run, it's hard not to carry part of our baggage with us. As Mark says, it's kind of like running with scissors. Scissors are a tool. They aren't bad. But if a child runs and falls with scissors in their hands, it can be incredibly dangerous. And as Jacob runs from his home, he too carries some dangerous baggage. Grief, anger, guilt. Nothing inherently bad, but dangerous indeed if unattended to. And this is where we and Jacob must let God enter our story. And God's touch is not overpowering. In the text, it's just a dream. Think about how faint dreams can be upon awakening. They're wispy, hard to get your hands on and pin down, which seems to be the same way that our God touches us ever so delicately. So delicately that if we're not paying attention, we're likely to miss it. But God does show up for the spiritually exiled. Whether it was the church, other people, or just circumstances that created spiritual refugees out of us, God is our refuge. God does not abandon or forsaken us no matter what it may have felt like. God's there for us in trouble. Are you alone in an empty field? God is there. Are you struggling to hear God in the wilderness? God is there. Are you running from something, anything? God is there. Wherever we find ourselves today, have faith that God sees you. You are not alone. Then there's another dimension to this story as well. Maybe like Jacob, we're not only a victim in the story. Maybe we've contributed. Jacob schemes his brother and ignites the flames of hatred burning inside of Esau. He does nothing deserving murder, to be sure, but Jacob certainly played his part. And it doesn't just hurt his relationship with Esau. All of Jacob's conniving and deceit does its own violence against Jacob's very own soul. So perhaps we too have made some poor choices along the way that have contributed to our own exile. And without redemption, the guilt and the shame that we carry is dangerous not only to ourselves, but to others also. But thank God, the Lord is here for us. And God meets us even there. John Wesley has a similar experience and a similar story. Wesley, who is the founder of the Methodist Church, damaged himself pretty badly along the way. He was a priest in the colony of Georgia, a chaplain to all of the colonists. But he refused to serve communion to people that he didn't like. Ooh. The despicable behavior got him fired, and rightfully so. And he was forced to leave his home and the life he knew there in Georgia and return an exile to England with his tail between his legs. He felt called to make a difference in the world, and he blew it. He failed. And he was overcome with guilt and even became depressed. And that's where God met him. His failure, guilt, dislocation, and isolation opened his heart to listen for the very first time to what he had heard over and over again. The words Paul wrote in his letter to the Romans. We are saved not by our own works of the law, but by faith alone, trusting in God's grace. And this time, Wesley knew that God was speaking just to him. And his life began to transform when he took these words seriously. And he slowly walked out of his own exile and went on to be one of the most influential Christians of his time and even ours. So wherever we are and however we got here, God comes to us too, to let us know that even if the church drove us away and abandoned us, God never did. Even when the world is cruel and unfair, God feels our pain. Despite what we may have thought, despite our own doubt, despite the silence, despite the greatest mistakes we have ever made, God has been right there with us all along. But it's not overpowering. It's the delicate touch of God. May we all have eyes to see and ears to hear God's presence in our own lives. And when we do, may we have the courage to answer the call and to walk out of our own spiritual exile and into a new and redeeming relationship with God. Amen.